Have you ever been scrolling through the internet and you come across an image that really catches your eye, but you can't quite tell if it's made by generative AI or not? Well, good news. This is the video for you. So today we're going to be looking at 4 different images that were generated by AI, and I'm going to go through and show you all the different signifiers that will help you in the future look at an image in detail and really be able to tell with a high degree of confidence whether or not that image is AI. I know a lot of people are getting tricked, and I'm going to be honest, a lot of times it's very, very, very hard to tell, if not impossible, that these images are AI generated. But oftentimes, almost always, there are signifiers in these images that let us know that they are, in fact, AI generated. So we're going to go through, we're going to look at 4 images from the same prompt from Midjourney, and we're going to look at all the different ways that we can tell that this is an AI generated image. And then in the future, when you are looking through art or something on the internet, hopefully you'll have the tool set to look at it very closely and be like, this is AI generated. Okay, no more talking, let's get into it. Okay, so this is our first image. This was generated inside of Midjourney, and I wanted to generate something that looked like a piece of concept art, something you might see out in the wild. Someone trying to fool you into thinking your favorite game's getting a sequel, or your favorite movie's getting a sequel, I don't know. But this is a pretty classic example of something that an AI will spit out at you. And I know we're starting a little bit easy here. I think already a lot of you can probably see there are a lot of different things that are not quite right with this image. I think the first thing, if we look down here, right, is the signature, or the whatever this is. A lot of times, the data sets that these AI images are scraping, basically, artists leave their signature so their work doesn't get stolen. And these platforms steal it anyway. So you end up in places where you would expect to see a signature, you kind of get this odd sort of, not signature, not quite English. But that's a very good place to look, first and foremost, to see if there is some kind of signature. The second thing is something you can kind of tell from a thumbnail view, right? If we scroll out here, we can see that this is a very, very well put together image, right? The values are all there. All the blacks are perfectly clipped down here. Nothing's really clipping up in the whites. Just in terms of value, if we take a black and white filter and put it over top of this, which I can never find, even though there's only 5 things, we can see that this image is very well comped. I say comped with air quotes because it's not comped, it's AI generated. But what AI is doing is it's taking not just a collection of images, but a collection of beautifully composed, well thought out images that just have, a really good set of values. So it seems kind of like a cop-out at first, because it's like, okay, are we just saying any image that looks really nice, it might be AI? And the answer is kind of yes, right? Because we're looking at data sets that are only really nice images. So when we look at this, let's take the black and white filter off and go back to our normal zoom. We can see that this image is just like so, at first glance, right, back in the thumbnail view, it's so perfect, right? Someone clearly spent hours and hours and hours on this. So that's the first thing. We can say, okay, we can see that this image is very, very well refined in terms of its color, its composition, its values. And from this distance, looking at this for a second, you can maybe be fooled. But really, when you see an image like this that looks, too good to be true, or like someone's masterpiece, it's worth going in and taking a little bit of a second look here. So the first thing we want to do is just look at the details, right? Does any of this make sense as a real construction? Now, already we can kind of see these windows here are just placed strangely, right? There's no sort of rhyme or reason to them. We kind of look into this and it just kind of feels like some architectural elements have been jammed together. None of it really makes that much sense. Likewise, these spires aren't quite symmetrical. Like, I'm not sure what's going on with this. I actually need to decrease my size here. All right, so I don't really know. We got like a shadow going on with this one, but this one doesn't have a shadow here. That doesn't quite make sense. Okay, what is this thing on this spire? How does it work? Why is this spire here like a little bit lopsided like that? And these elements are kind of like floating, right? There's these like particles floating here, right? So as you zoom into this image, you start to see there are all kinds of things wrong with it. You notice that the roof curvature isn't quite right. This like weird weather vane thing is just like visual noise. It's a pattern. It's not really a functional thing. We have this strange blue dot here, right? In isolation, any of these things might be okay. Maybe, the artist was rushing or whatever. Here's a very egregious one. Let's look at the silhouette on this tower. That is very funky and not at all architectural, right? Any artist who's taken a lesson in perspective. Oh, what is this? What is this thing? It's impossible to tell because the AI doesn't really know what it's making. And that's like a big lesson we need to understand. AI doesn't know what it's doing. It's really just copying a bunch of patterns from other artworks, from humans who do know what they're doing, or hopefully know what they're doing. So it puts all these things together into something that at first glance looks like a well put together image, but upon further assessing of the details, like, what is this? Nothing quite seems right. Same thing. We have sort of this crowd down here. It's kind of hard to tell. It's kind of lost in the compression, but maybe this is like a walkway of some kind. And all these people are standing in very neat rows. Maybe that's on purpose. Kind of hard to tell. We'll also notice there's this kind of same sort of noise pattern that's going through the entire image here. And that's another big signifier. It's maybe hard to tell in the compression. But there's just kind of this noise pattern that's kind of laid over the entire image that makes it look not good, not quite right? And then you just kind of see it in the roof tiles. You see it here and like all the trees, and even in sort of these blank spaces. So we've got noise patterns. We've got sort of geometry that doesn't make any sense. And really, it's just looking at this image for any amount of time close up, you realize that it's just completely nonsensical. Now I'm like noticing all these like highlights. What are these? Right? We're not exactly sure what these are. Are they reflections? Are they, like what is it? All these hotspots, and we've got this sort of like red thing here. I don't know what that is. I don't know what this orange thing. And this is really kind of the trick. Is once you start to zoom in on these images, it becomes clear very quickly that they are just nonsense, just kind of kit bashed stuff that's been, thrown together with no rhyme or reason, right? There's a seam here on this bridge that like the AI is kind of like figured out, but like it doesn't quite make sense. And then is this supposed to be an architectural element on this arch? But it doesn't have one over here. And then there's a doorway that just goes out into nothing. So you would fall if you like fell out of this castle. Like none of it makes sense, right? And I think that's the number one thing you can do when you're trying to figure out whether or not an image is AI is just look closely at it. Figure out, okay, do the details here make sense? Are these choices a human being would make? And if the answer is no, there's a very good chance that you're looking at an AI image. So of the 4 images that Midjourney spit out from that one prompt, this is the second one. And right away, we can already tell there's some things wrong with this image. Now, on first glance, it seems like the geometry is a little bit more spot on, right? Like this bridge makes sense, right? It does widen here a little bit at the lip, but like generally it makes sense. There's like this army. It's supposed to be a festival in my prompt, whatever. It's like an army moving. We've got, the castle entrance here. There's a big crowd here. Like, the geometry of the scene makes sense. We have this plane of water right here, right? So the geometry of the scene generally makes sense. But there are some things right away that are just strange. And I think one of the things that if you're having trouble telling if something's AI, look at the birds. All right. These are not birds. These are just little tiny bird-like particles that are in the sky. But they're certainly not birds. Even the ones that are more close up. Okay, this is kind of starting to look like a bird. I don't know what this is. There's like a beak here. I think this is the face. And then it kind of goes like this. I don't know. I have no idea. But the first thing first is like, okay, the birds look all kinds of wrong. And then there's also some like orange birds here. Maybe they're catching some sunset light. Kind of hard to tell. Over here, let's see. Now, these, it's just like, this just looks like trash falling from the sky, right? Back here, it's like, okay, they're birds or confetti or something. But as we zoom in, it's like, okay, they're not really anything. Like, what human would have made this as a conscious choice? So that's number one. Number two is, once again, we can zoom in at these architectural details. And we notice, you can probably tell here, this is what I'm talking about when I talk about this noise pattern, right? These like weird sort of horizontal lines that just go through everything that create this fake sense of texture. I don't know if you've ever AI upscaled an image, but you occasionally get a lot of this sort of detail in here. And it's just adding these micro details without those micro details actually meaning anything, right? And it ends up just kind of becoming noisy. And sure, maybe that's, the style, but it really looks incredibly digital, right? It's not like someone's taken a bunch of little tiny dots and like created this beautiful shading pattern with these dots. It just really looks incredibly digital. So that's the second thing that jumps right out to me is like this noise pattern. And also if we just, look at the architectural styles, things start to not make sense, right? Clearly there's this dome motif, right? And as we start looking at these domes, okay, no two domes are the same, which is, I guess, okay conceptually, but they're all just kind of wonky. Like, what is this shape of like this one? This one's kind of big and has this point on top. This one is like a, right? This one doesn't quite look right either, right? They all look a little bit strange. And I just look at the roof on this guy. Look at this roof. That is an issue. That thing is going to cave in and then it like kind of shoots out this way, but there's no equal side on this side. Okay, so that's not looking too great, right? We can tell, see, this tower looks okay, but once again, it's like, what is this long window, short window? At least it has some windows here, but they're all kind of different lengths. They kind of look like, they're all messed up. And then back here in the background, we have another castle that's just a completely different architectural style from this one. It's like, okay, maybe, if you're thinking like the artist, maybe the story is a bunch of people are coming for this festival here to this castle, and maybe they came all the way from this kingdom back here. It's across the river. I don't know. That's just trying to rationalize it, but ultimately it's like, it doesn't really make any sense. And I just noticed here, my eyes just flew to this. What is this? Alien sort of box, right? You see that? Oh, it's my head's covering it. Look. It's this alien sort of box just like floating here. No idea what that is, just like another particle. Also, if we look at the architecture of this castle, it starts to not make sense. Now, something that you always want to look for is anytime there's a point where there should be symmetry, I want you to look and check and see if they're actually symmetrical. Now, this actually does a pretty good job of being symmetrical. We're going to draw a vertical line here. Let's make our thing a little bit smaller. Draw a vertical line up the center of this castle, and I'm doing this with a mouse, so forgive me. But here we can see that, okay, these have some elements here that are pretty symmetrical. In theory, they're not quite there, but we do kind of have this, okay, so this lip isn't matching this one on this side. It's kind of a window here, kind of a window here. So it attempted symmetry and did a better job than AI usually does, if I'm being honest. But we can start to see, even just looking through the symmetry, that, okay, there's stripes on this side, but not on this side. Or maybe they are, they're just not shaded the same. The shapes just don't quite match up, right? A human artist would very easily be able to say, okay, this looks wonky, right? They'd be able to say, this roof, what even is this? It looks like a slice of watermelon, or like, this roof doesn't quite look right. The perspective isn't off. A good artist who would be capable of making an image like this would have all this stuff down. So already, oh, here's a good one. There's kind of like, is this a staircase that leads into nothing? Not quite sure what that is, right? And this is sort of, especially when it comes to like this concept art sort of stuff, let's try and ascertain what kind of animal this is. Are these ducks? That one kind of looks like a duck, but it also looks like a seal. There's just no detail. There's nothing there. There's nothing a human would make that would signify to us, oh, that is a duck. Is this the Loch Ness Monster? We don't really know. Then neither does the AI who made this, right? The AI has absolutely no idea what it's making. It's just taking a bunch of similar images and creating a new one out of its idea of what these images are. But it doesn't truly know what it's making. And that's why when you look down at the details, nothing quite makes sense and nothing quite adds up. Okay, let's move on to our next image. Now, this image has kind of the same problem as the other ones, where at first glance, it maybe looks okay, but like we can tell that there is clearly some sort of castle here, right? Okay, here's our castle, and we've got our sort of festival grounds down here, our city's here, there's another tower on the horizon, we have a nice defined sort of like mountainscape back here. Honestly, this is giving like Myst vibes. I don't know if any of you guys remember Myst from back in the day. I was like basically too young to even enjoy it, but I know some of you old timers out there remember Myst. It's like a point and click adventure game. Scared the bejesus out of me when I was a kid. But yeah, I mean, aesthetic aside, at first glance, right, this looks okay. It's somewhat logical, right? We can see what we're looking at. But as always, second we move in and start looking at the details, things just start to break down. So for instance, what is this? It's a bridge. Is it like a laundry chute, a zip line? It's kind of hard to tell, right? One of the words in the prompt was festival, so it's like, okay, maybe this is a streamer, but if we think about the scale of this image, like this streamer would have to be absolutely huge, like colossally big, right? Because it's next to this big castle. Likewise, look at this bridge. It has this like sudden divot, and it's got this kind of pillar that sticks up above the bridge here, but this one doesn't. It's not quite flush, so that doesn't quite make sense there. Similarly, if we look at these rooftops, right, no two of these rooftops look the same. Some of them have the gilded cap. This one and this one. This one has the gilded cap. This one does too, but this one doesn't. That one doesn't either. Looking down here at the street, nothing really makes sense about this streetway here, right? You would imagine that an artist would put like vendors or people walking around or chickens or something, but it's just, when we zoom in, it's just noise. It's just gobbledygook. And that's the same down here. Like, what is this? Is this a bridge? Are there people on this bridge? What are these things down here? It kind of looks like it thinks that it's a boat, but it's also not a boat. It's like a fancy bridge, it's like a tower. And is this also a tower? And is this a boat? Okay, not quite making sense. We have the noise here of the crowd, but sure, the crowd's far enough away. Maybe that's okay. We can look at these tents, though, and realize that, okay, some of the tents have, like, interesting perspectives on them. Now, there's also these docks here that don't quite make sense. And same with this bridge here. This is like the weirdest looking rickety bridge I've ever seen. So these are all the signifiers we've been looking at before. None of these have had a signature besides the first one. But there's a few others in this one that we can also look at. And one of those is reflections. Now, a lot of times AI will reflect things that aren't there, right? I think this reflection is supposed to be this tree, but it's not quite working out. And it could be just the nature of the large-scale turbulence in this water is making the tree wiggle that way. But we're also missing whatever this is, right? It looks like there's a tower reflected in the water, but that tower should be like here, right? And it's nowhere. Maybe it's trying to it thinks it's reflecting this up here. Not quite sure. Also down here, this bridge, just like clearly the shape of it, like where is the water line? It's like right here. So like this reflection should be going back like this, but instead it keeps getting wider. Similarly, like the arch patterns don't match. You can just tell right off the bat. Same with this. Like we should have this prominent bright triangle pattern in this house here, but it's not in the reflection of the water. And that's one of those things, like in the details, like it just AI has a really hard time generating those reflections and creating an image that looks, that is actually physically accurate, right? In a way that a true, real human artist would instinctively know, right? An artist knows how to draw a reflection, and AI, it doesn't, right? Because an AI is not making art. It's just regenerating something that a different artist has done. And when it has to make an image that's cohesive and it doesn't know how to make reflections, you just end up with reflections that are super janky looking, right? I do want to look down here because this was interesting because to me, there's some nice detail happening here, right? We can see this sort of like alcove sticking out. It kind of looks janky. It's not symmetrical, but it looks like it's supposed to be like that. But as we go further this way, like we kind of start to be like, okay, not quite sure what that is. Maybe this image is just compressed to oblivion. Okay, what is this? What is this tower that has like this kind of strange roof? Okay, none of it's really adding up. And as we look at it closely, just these details start to fall through. Now, I will say, ultimately, the diagnosis or whatever as an AI image should really come from a bunch of these different places, right? Because human artists make mistakes all the time, right? Human artists will make a decision and say, hey, I'm going to change, or let's take this reflection, for example. Maybe a human artist would put a fake reflection here just to help create some like interesting negative space in the water here, right? Maybe they wanted to cut out a piece of this blue, so they added this reflection, and that's fine. An artist is able to make that decision, and you know, it's up to that, right? And a lot of times it looks great, but ultimately, when we're trying to discern whether or not an image is AI, we need to be looking at all of these different parts and being like, okay, how much of this image actually makes sense? And the answer here is like almost none of it, right? These big, large-scale shapes, okay, the tower here, the donjons, right? They look kind of like what they're supposed to look like. But anytime we zoom into the details, it just becomes noise the closer we get, in a way that with human art is just absolutely not the case. So moving on to our last image, I feel like I should have started with this one because it seems like the easiest, right? We have clearly right off the bat, we just have these sort of nonsensical particles floating around that look cool, right? That's a cool looking particle, but what is it, right? Is it magical energy? Is it, I don't know, some kind of streamer? It's completely unclear in a way that a human artist would want us to know this is clear. We've got another one over here. We've got some over here. These quote-unquote cool-looking particles, which I would include birds in this as well. You can look over here, see we have some non-birds in this image. We have some strange particles here, right? Quote-unquote cool-looking particles are one of the biggest signifiers of AI because they almost never have any definition, but clearly they're trying to emulate a certain feeling, right? Whether this be confetti, whether it be magic. It's trying to emulate something a human artist would do, but it's just not doing it. Similarly, these like drapery towers are all kind of close to similar, like almost to the point where you're like, yeah, I guess maybe depending on what the artist was going for, they have, this similar sort of drape shape. And they're not all going to be the same, right? Because they're different like pieces of fabric. But as we get over here to this one, it's like the shape of it starts to change completely. And it just starts to be nonsensical. Same with when we're zooming into this crowd here. There's nothing really here at this scale of the illustration telling us that this is a crowd. It's literally just noise, right? Like look at that and tell me if you know what it is, right? At this glance. You absolutely cannot, right? Because it's just sort of, it's giving the idea of crowd, the vibe of crowd, but we're not really getting any human signifiers that this is actually a crowd. I'm also noticing that the timbers or shingles on this roof have like a really strange pattern, kind of this way here, and they like bend on this one. This roof is like bent, clearly bent. Architecturally, we've got issues. Same thing with the trees here. There's no like definition in this tree. It's just noise pattern. Right, and we have a few branches here. But at the end of the day, it's just kind of noise pattern tucked in here. So really, and see, we got more nice looking particles here. We've got more architecture that just doesn't make any sense. It's just like greeble for the sake of greeble. None of it really makes any sense at all. And that's the gist of it. We start wide, we look at this composition, we say, hey, this looks neat. But the second we start looking at the details, the little things that make it human, it just completely breaks down. So especially with concept art, this is what I want you guys to be looking for when you are out in the wild, when you see something that looks great. Don't immediately just post it to your Instagram story. Don't immediately comment on it and be like, wow, you're such a great artist, right? Because a lot of times in this day and age, in this new generative AI age we're living in, a lot of these images are not made by a person. Now, this is just one example of a fantasy illustration. There are AI photos, AI cartoons, AI 3D renders, and we're gonna go in different videos and break down each and every one of those. So stay tuned for that. If you liked this, please let me know. I definitely want to do more in the future. I'm definitely going to do more in the future, but if you want me to expand this into a bigger series, I'd love to. Okay, that's all I got for today. Thank you guys so much, and I hope you learned something today. That's all. Thanks.